Can you spot my wayward wife in her frown? Yes. The usual problem. All these gentlemen of color have driven a mere Nordic out of her mind. Have I laid eyes on her tonight, except in spots here and there being twirled about by some Ethiopian? I have not.
Well, sir, you have to admit that the average colored man is a better dancer than the average white. That is, the celebrities who find their way up here are fair specimens of your sort.
Having not tripped the light fantastic with any of the males, I'm hardly in a position to argue the point. Bianca and Co. are always raving on about the good looks of some Negro, especially an unusually dark one, like Ralph Hazelton there. Dozens of women have declared him fantastically handsome. What do you think? Is he?
No, and I don't think anyone else would either. It's just plain exoticism. An interest in what's different. Kind of emotional excitement. Something you feel in the presence of something strange. Even perhaps a bit repugnant to you.
And there you have it. So, you subscribe to the notion that our motives for coming up here are predatory?
No. More curious, I should say.
A Harlem madam I'd come to know, through having done a friend of hers a favor, introduced me to a special facet of the Harlem night world, something which the riot had only interrupted. It was the world where, behind locked doors, Negroes catered to moneyed white people's weird sexual tastes. The whites I'd known loved to rub shoulders publicly with black folks in the after-hours clubs and speakeasies. These, on the other hand, were whites who did not want it known that they'd been anywhere near Harlem. The riot had made these exclusive white customers nervous. Their slipping into and about Harlem hadn't been so noticeable when other whites were also around, but now they would be conspicuous. They also feared the recently aroused anger of Harlem Negroes. So the madam was safeguarding her growing operation by offering me a steerer's job. Harlem was their sin den, their flesh pot. They stole off among taboo black people and took off whatever antiseptic, important, dignified masks they wore in their white world. These were men who could afford to spend large amounts of money for 2, 3, or 4 hours indulging their strange appetites. Anything they could name, anything they could imagine, anything they could describe, they could do or could have done to them, just as long as they paid. One of my main steers to one specialty address away from the madam's house was the apartment of a big, coal-black girl, strong as an ox, with muscles like a dock worker's. A funny thing, it generally was the oldest of these white men, in their 60s, I know, some maybe in their 70s. They couldn't seem to recover quickly enough from their last whipping, so they could have me meet them again at 45th and Broadway to take them back to that apartment, to cringe on their knees and beg and cry out for mercy under that black girl's whip. Some of them would pay me extra to come and watch them being beaten. That girl greased her big Amazon body all over to look shinier and blacker. She used small, plaited whips. She would draw blood, and she was making herself a small fortune off those old white men. White girls were in some of the various Harlem specialty places. They would participate in customers' most frequent exhibition requests. A sleek, black Negro male having a white woman. Was this the white man wanting to witness his deepest sexual fear? A few times I even had parties that included white women whom the men had brought with them to watch this.
Context of White Supremacy. Gus T. Renegade in for another broadcast, hopefully to share constructive information on the system of white supremacy. Today's date, Tuesday, April 26, 2022. So I have been told. Quickly, said it has been super challenging and all that, COVID-19 and all the rest of it. So we were here on Saturday for the compensatory call-in. I said, man, we had all these other issues and what have you, and was going to get people on the line. Turns out we had quite a few people who attempted to ring in for our broadcast this past Saturday. I didn't even see them on the switchboard. I have no idea what happened, why it didn't show that we had people that were calling in, but we missed quite a few folks. They emailed once the program was done, like, man, what's going on? I was on the line, not trying to let people talk. Crazy. So hopefully that will not happen today. I'll give out the number right now, 720-716-7300. The code 564943 pound. Press star 61 if you would like to participate, and please drop me an email if you get a hand up, you have a question that you would like to ask and want to get on the line. If I'm not getting your hand or what have you, drop me an email and let me know. I will do my best to make sure that I see that before we go off the air. But yeah, that was a real bummer. I wish we had got folks on this past weekend. We will compensate for that directly. The audio segments that we heard at the beginning of the broadcast today, the first segment from the 2021, like right at the end of the year, so not that long ago, adaptation of Passing, black and white, all that interesting scene between one of the main characters, Irene, non-white female. She's talking to Hugh, white man. They're having their discussion about why these black, and this movie is taking place in like the 1920s, so like 100 years ago, in New York City, Harlem. And so they're, why do you think these white people are coming down to go to this nightclub? And you heard that exchange. We break from that to Minister Malcolm X, his autobiography with the help of Alex Haley. That is a huge component of the first portion of his autobiography, the Detroit Red years prior to Nation of Islam and all that, which actually does come up in the text today. Yikes. Woo, full circle. But before we get to all of that, he does spend a lot of time talking about all the slumming and white people hanging out in the black part of town in lots of different areas, including Harlem, New York. In the book club, no less, 2015. So we got here today, the book club, the Cows Book Club. I have to say it again. Reading is more important than watching television. So one reason reading is more important than watching television. I've heard a number of folks, they watch some goofy movie, you watch Godfather 1, and you got to watch number 2, and then you got to watch number 3. And I guess maybe, you can learn something out of watching all these repeats. Now, I mean, sometimes they get you and you get like Shrek 15. With books, generally, you follow a reference and you get your follow-up book or whatever you're going to read. You might learn some information. So how did we get here today? The Cows Book Club. We are currently, oh my God, so important for about 1 billion different readings. Time for reasons. Time is right and exact. So the book club, we're reading Essie Mae Washington-Williams, Dear Senator. Whew. So many parallels for everything we're talking about today. In that book, matter of fact, I can read it to you exactly. What does she say in that book? Essie Mae, in addition to talking about lots of different lynchings of black males, poor, down and out, drunkard black people in general, black males specifically, she brings up passing. What does she say? She says, she compares some of the characters to people that she's known in the book. She says the other girl, who is blonde and blue-eyed but still half black, has passed for white and married a powerful Park Avenue banker who is also a hardcore racist. His pet name for his olive-skinned wife is Nig, as in Negra. He had no clue about her mixed blood. In the book, the two friends reconnect and each decides the other has the better life. The doctor's wife wishes she had passed and escaped from Harlem, while the banker's wife is sorry about the tense charade she is living and yearns to go back to Harlem. In the end, the white banker discovers his wife's deception and he catches her at a glamorous black party in a Sugar Hill luxury apartment modeled on 409 Edgecombe. The book wasn't clear whether she is pushed or jumps out the window, but the message was clear. Passing was a bad idea. That's how we ended up here today, because at that time, I hadn't seen the film. I knew about Nella Larsen a little bit, not a whole lot. I hadn't read any of her books. I was very aware they have really pushed it heavily in the academy over the past few years. When I say they, I mean white people at the university level. So I hadn't read her scholarship, but I read this and I said, yikes, is that passing? Like she gets thrown out the door or whatever. Like, yikes, is that it? And I said, oh man, is that in the movie that they just did? Like, that's what we got to be subjected to in 2022, basically. It is. But now, what I was even more inspired, because she goes on in the book, she mentions Nella Larsen again, and she says, oh yeah, before she wrote that book, she was down at Tuskegee. She was a nurse. Essie Mae Washington-Williams, she was a nurse before she switched up, became a teacher, and wrote her book. I said, oh my gosh. Wow, I had no idea she was at Tuskegee, like Booker T. Washington, Tuskegee syphilis experiment, Tuskegee, although she wasn't there during that time, but I mean, wow, that's amazing. I said, I need to learn more about this Nella Larsen. Same thing we do here at the Cows, autobiography of Minister Malcolm X. We're reading Essie Mae Washington-Williams' memoir. I had never in my life would have thought, wow, you do read a lot of biographies. You can learn a lot studying some folks' lives. Went to see, hey, let's get one of the biographies on Nella Larsen. So our guest for today's broadcast wrote one of the more recent biographies on Nella Larsen, titled In Search of Nella Larsen, a biography of the color line. Very important. We'll talk about his reason for selecting that title. He is the Newton C. Farr Professor of American Culture at Cornell University. Nella Larsen seems to be one of his favorite subjects, in addition to Walt Whitman and the Harlem Renaissance in general. Will be a hoot to have him on the program, discuss his book, some of his thoughts on the life and times of one Nella Larsen. Joining us live, our guest, Dr. George Hutchinson. Dr. Hutchinson, are you with us, sir?
Yeah, hi. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir. You're coming in clear. Can you hear us okay?
Okay. Yep, got it.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing a bit of your Tuesday evening with us. Dr. Hutchinson, for folks who may not have read In Search of Nella Larsen, this might be their first time hearing from you. If you want to just give us kind of a brief intro, who you are and the work you do, sir.
Okay, yeah, I'm a professor at Cornell University, and I'm a scholar of American literature and American culture. Broadly considered, but a lot of my work has featured on American racial culture, basically. So interracial relations in American literature, African American literature, racist strains in American literature, and just dealings with issues of race and the racial culture of the United States.
Awesome.
And the way I came across Nella Larsen, or became interested in her, of course, I had written a book on the Harlem Renaissance, and a lot of that was really focused on the relationship between the Harlem Renaissance and American cultural nationalism. That is, many of the writers in the Harlem Renaissance wanted to emphasize the Americanness of African Americans, and say, as Du Bois does in The Souls of Black Folks, that there's no one is more American than African Americans, because they had created the most distinctive American cultures, music, and so on and so forth. But anyway, so following that book, I was going to write a book on interracial literature in American culture, in American history, meaning literature that focuses on interracial intimacies, children of interracial couples, that kind of thing. And Nella Larsen was naturally going to be an important factor in that book. And then some recent biographies had come out which told the story of her life in a certain way that immediately I thought red flags started going up, and I kind of thought I would question those. So that's how I ended up writing on Larsen. Eventually I decided that a new biography really did need to be written.
Much obliged. Dr. Hutchinson, In Search of Nella Larsen, a biography of the color line. For folks who have not seen you, you are a white man. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Awesome. This program, words, very important. I even wrote that down. Racial culture, racial strings in literature, even in the subtitle of this book, the book that we're talking about this evening, the color line. Words are very important. I've concluded that all of those terms, what they are addressing is racism. I also use the term white supremacy. I use those two terms as synonyms, and I use the same definition for both terms. The definition I use is as follows: a global system of people who classify themselves as white and are dedicated to abusing and or subjugating everyone in the known universe whom they classify as not white. Do you think such a system exists? Do you think that definition is accurate?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that is the definition of white supremacy. Absolutely. And white racism. Yeah. And so the way that whiteness
well, hang on right there. And that's one thing that I just said about programs. I didn't use the word whiteness, and that's going to be very important for the broadcast in terms of words being very important. I didn't say racial culture, racial strain, color line, system of white supremacy, and I said individuals classified as white specifically, and I'm making a point of this. I've concluded that one of the reasons we have not solved this problem yet, and I mean non-white people, victims of racism, incorrect use of words, which produces incorrect thought. And what happens frequently, I would say a lot of times, this is not accidental, this is done deliberately, where we're not using the most accurate terms to describe this problem, and that's producing confusion because it's just not accurate. You have to describe problems accurately if you want to solve them. Do you agree with that, Dr. Hutchinson?
Yes, I do. In fact, I would wonder how do you define race?
I have not used the term race at all. I use the term white supremacy and
how
racism.
Do you define a white person? How do you define a white person?
An individual who is classified, and this is going to be the only question that I answer, an individual who is classified and accepted as white by a substantial, significant number of individuals who are also accepted, classified as white.
Okay.
Now, get back to my question point. Now, I want to point that out for our listeners because the pivots just keep happening. They're all over the place. The title, it's color line. He said racial culture, racial strain, whiteness, race. None of those are most accurate for what we're talking about. The most accurate term, white supremacy. That is the only, even white racism, because that suggests that you have some other types of racism. And I'm just pointing this out for non-white people because the confusion, anyone who has been with us for Essie Mae Washington-Williams, and it's some of the same terms that will come up when we get in this book. But anywho, one other thing that I want to point out, is it logical, Dr. Hutchinson, for anyone who is classified as not white, is it logical for that person to be suspicious of anyone, even yourself, Dr. Hutchinson, who is classified as white? Does that make sense in a system of white supremacy racism?
Of course it does.
Much obliged for the honesty. If we can have as much honesty, and if you can make an effort, because I've also concluded one of the ways that white people deliberately practice racism is to not answer questions or to use unnecessary amounts of words in answering the question, so it totally diffuses the answer. You're not even sure if you got your question answered, to make sure that we get, even if you don't agree with a point, definitely say so. We're not trying to, the metaphor they use is put words in your mouth. Just tell us what you think. We're trying to have adult conversation. Hopefully we can discuss the book, learn a lot about Nella Larsen, and ask you some questions about the book as well. Is that acceptable, Dr. Hutchinson?
Yeah.
Awesome. Let's see. You already answered one of my questions in terms of Nella Larsen's, what motivated you to read about this book, and you talked about some of the inaccuracies, maybe, or red flags. That was a metaphor that you used, some of the red flags about some of the research on her life and times. I'd even say one of them you heard in Essie Mae Washington-Williams in her comment about passing and saying that she either jumped, talking about Claire, or was pushed. Folks who saw the movie or read the book, we'll come back to that in a moment. I guess to start off, because I've been talking about words the whole time, so with your biography, In Search of Nella Larsen, a biography of Colorline, you already told us kind of what led you into studying her. What led you to this title specifically, In Search of Nella Larsen, a biography of the color line?
Because I'm tracing the way that the division between black and white, that is the color line, has been reproduced from generation to generation, beginning in the era when she was born, 1891, up to the present day. And this affected her in a particular way because her mother was a white immigrant from Denmark, and her father, her natural father, was a man of color. We don't know if he considered himself black or mulatto or what, but he was from the Danish Virgin Islands. And he abandoned them very quickly after she was born. And then she was raised within a totally white family. Her mother ended up marrying another white Danish immigrant. And so Larson was the one Negro child, or in those days they would have called her mulatto, in the days when she was born, within a white family in a very racist society, and had to negotiate that.
When you say the division between black and white, what do you mean?
I just mean the way that people decide who is black and who is white.
That's what you mean when you say the division between black and white? Who decides who's white and who's black? Okay.
Yeah, it's how it's decided. It's how people determine who is black and who is white.
Okay. Even if we want to go with that, determining who is white and who is black, and whatever, mulatto, whatever else, who is making that determination, Dr. Hutchinson?
Above all, it's white people. Yeah, I mean, it's the white power structure. It goes back to early colonial times in North America when different colonies had different ways of defining race and defining who was white, who was black, and they started. One of the first things was because there were white and black people who were having intimate relations, in some cases getting married. There were white indentured servants, and black enslaved people, and so forth, having kids. And so the colonies started instituting laws saying you can't do this. And then they had to decide who counts as black and who counts as white. Some people, in some colonies, if you had one grandfather or grandmother who was black, then you were black. But in other colonies, the rule was different. So in other words, the color line was defined in different ways in different places. But over the course of American history and up to the 20th century, the one-drop rule came into play, more pervasively across the country, where if it was known that you had one black ancestor, that made you black. And all of this served white supremacy, obviously. It was instituted to do that.
Absolutely. Very important. With all of that said then, to serve white supremacy, and in particular that white people are making these decisions, and I even point that out, that it's not the colonies that decided, it's not the white power structure. Individuals classified as white are the power structure It's not a law that's doing this. It's not a piece of land. Individuals classified. Hang on a second. Because this is super important, and this happens almost every time someone talks about racism, where it's not individuals classified as white being held accountable for doing these things that maintain, refine, expand white supremacy racism as a total global system, known universe system, really. And my question, you could give us your extra as well. My question, do you think, Dr. Hutchinson, it would be more accurate, your title, if it was In Search of Nella Larsen, a biography of the system of white supremacy racism? Is that more accurate than a biography of the color line? Let's see. Oh, Dr. Hutchinson, he dipped. I think he hung up on us. I do have his number. I'll try to ring him back. I'll see if we can get him back. But, oh, man. The wording in the book tells you everything you need to know. And that interrupting, because I answered his questions. I wasn't jumping in and interrupting him like, come on with all that. Let's see. Give me a moment and I will. Let's see. Oh, okay. All right. Give me one moment and we'll ring him up. Right here does not get any better than tacky. Let's see. Forgive the dial. We'll see if we get Dr. Hutchinson with us.
Hi, this is George. I'm sorry I can't get to the phone right now. Leave your number and brief message and I'll get back to you. Thank you. Bye.
Greetings, Dr. Hutchinson. Bringing you back. You dropped off the line on the program when I was in the middle of my question. We'll try and ring you back again. We'll see what's going on, but we'll try again. Thanks, Dr. Hutchinson. Let's see. Okay, we'll try and dial him back. I certainly could have allowed him to, interrupt and talk over me, but I mean, really, I do not interrupt, jump over, talk over people. I think he was giving his response earlier in the program. I didn't cut him off. I said, oh, awesome. I thought he was done and he added more. No problem. He agreed with my question. Right to be suspicious. Give us your response. All of that. I didn't hop in to interrupt him when he was talking. Saying should be allowed. It shouldn't be when I'm talking, you get to hop in and interrupt me whenever you want to. And then specifically to leave when I'm going to ask my question about what is a more accurate term? Like I said, because he uses that term all throughout the book, the color line. And it's not like this is in quotes. It's not like Nella Larsen used the term color line, and so he's just using it because she used it. Even if that were the case, one, you should put it in quotes, which is not. But two, hey, color line is not the most accurate to describe. And I mean, hey, we're talking about the time they are lynching black people for fun during this time period. Now, I mean, really, that's color line. Really, we could be calling this system of terrorism. But at minimum, white supremacy, racism. Yeah, come on now. That continues. You heard it in the conversation right there, just in that short period with the words that he was using to deflect away from white supremacy, racism, racial culture, racial strings, white power structure, colonies, color line. It's all of this to diffuse away from, let's use the most accurate terms to describe racism, white supremacy. And even if Nella Larsen, W.E.B. Du Bois, whomever it is, even if they are using inaccurate terminology or an entire inaccurate framework, which is generally the case, I'm not just going to replicate what's wrong. I can look at there's a better way of describing Jim Crow and all. Come on. let's be more accurate, and the American, because that's not what this is. And that comes up in this book repeatedly. American racism. We're not in a global, he agreed to that. He agreed that with the definition, global system. That's in the book consistently, as though you can leave and go someplace else. He has in the book, he's talking about Nella Larsen. She goes to Denmark, and the word exotic is used over and over to describe her. In fact, forget that. This is the cows. We've been here for 13 years. What have we done? Zwart Piet. That is Denmark. You can't even get them. Can we stop with Black Pete? And I mean, that's like now, 2022. Can we stop with Black Pete? Is it possible we can stop with Black Pete? Is it that's a little bit racist to have this little Negro elf, or infrequently it's a white person in blackface type of a thing. Is it possible they went out and protested and demonstrated? Is it possible we can stop Black Pete? No, we got to keep Black Pete. Okay. We've had whole programs, in fact, in the archives. We've talked about Black Pete, 2012, with black people in Denmark to attest to the white supremacy racism being global. But all of these components, in my view, are extremely important because it just keeps non-white people confused about what we're talking about. Jim Crow and white privilege, all of it. And when you are not saying, hey, it's individuals classified as white who are doing these, who's doing the classifying? Is that non-white people and black people getting together to do all of this? No? Oh, okay. Okay. We'll try again to dial him, make sure he is practicing racism, white supremacy, and excusing himself from the conversation. Let's see. Forgive the ring. We'll try again. Let's see. All right, here we go.
Hi, this is George. I'm sorry I can't get to the phone right now. Leave your number and brief message, and I'll get back to you. Thank you. Bye.
Greetings, Dr. Hutchinson. Dialing you back like I suspect that you're practicing racism. You agreed to speak with us, dialed in. I asked you reasonable questions. In fact, I didn't interrupt you. You couldn't even provide the same courtesy. That's what I would expect from an individual classified as white. Evening, sir.
If you are satisfied with your message, press 1 to listen to your message.
There we go. Practicing racism, white supremacy. And now, again, he agreed, even with the short bit that we had him, he agreed. Yep. System of racism, white supremacy, and it's global. He agreed. Should we be suspicious? Anybody classified as white, even you? Yep. So what's the problem? Somebody cursing at you? Somebody interrupting you? Because, I mean, that's basic. That's like kindergarten. You get to speak, I speak. Hey, 13 years, what I do? I press my mute button unless I'm talking. There is no interrupting. Anywho, this white man writing about, and extensively as well, about Nella Larsen, like, most of it was going to center back to words. Like, I was hoping, let's get some of the beginnings in Chicago. Chicago, we're so right on time because we just spent all that time this weekend talking about Chicago. Fred Hampton's house, made a historic site. They talked about, they had a black former officer in Chicago where they vacated like dozens of convictions of exclusively black people in the South Side, same region, even with Nella Larsen, where they vacated all of these convictions, where they made up all these charges on that. I mean, it was tons of things. They had different different police officers, not black. They didn't identify persons unknown. They didn't identify them, but they said these were Chicago police officers who were supposed to be fired. Notice I didn't say former. They were supposed to be fired, but they haven't been. Still on, they said in some cases months, some cases years. They said they had low staff morale because of, anyway, it was tons that we talked about Chicago this weekend. So Nella Larsen, born in Chicago, In the 1890s, Satan's Mile ran down from State Van Buren to 22nd Street. According to Herbert Asbury, the section south of Taylor Street was known as Coon Hollow and was populated mostly by blacks, with a scattering of whites and several bawdy houses where white women were kept for the pleasure of Negro men. I could have broke the cowbell on this one. Any type of program like that, I generally just don't play. Comes a distraction if you have to say it every other word. But Satan's Mile. This is what I mean about what are we talking about when we say color line. If you're new to the context of white supremacy, if this is your first time hearing the cows, you're like, oh my God, this savage Negro and, being uncouth, and you ran off this distinguished Cornell professor. Pause right there. Hey, this fella acknowledged that we're in a system of white supremacy racism. If it's the color line, because he used the word barriers in the book as well, and separation, that's a big one. Dear Senator, in fact, that's the whole reason that we're reading Dear Senator, because J. Russell Hawkins did the same thing in talking about separation. What did I say to him? If it's separation, J. Strom Thurmond, get your penis out of that 15-year-old. That's what I said to him, remember? I could have used the exact same line, had it right there for Dr. Hutchinson. What do you mean color line? What do you mean barriers? He told us in the short time he was here. Oh yeah, Nella Larsen has a white mom, non-white father. If there's separation, if there's a so-called color line, that wouldn't be happening, right? Even here in this, and I mean, even if you want to make it American, he does that in the book. So-called American. That's why I started with Minister Malcolm X. Like, what are you talking about? Rethinking Rufus, what are you talking about? J. Strom Thurmond, what are you talking about? You're the same way that he got off this line in a tacky man. He could have even just said, hey, you're being niggerish and interrupting me or whatever, which was not the case. I'm interrupting you, but whatever. You're being niggerish, I'm going to live. He didn't even do that to just leave. Tacky white man through and through. In fact, let's see. I was going to call him again. In fact, if any of you all would like to give him a ring, if you want to be tacky all the way through, 812-360-7953. His number again, 812-360-7953. Feel free to give Dr. Hutchinson a ring at your convenience. Just, why did you leave? We were having a discussion. You agreed. System of racism, right? You agreed. Be suspicious, right? You were interrupting him. What's up? You didn't even say goodbye. What's the deal? Race soldier doesn't get any better than tacky. Let me see. Make sure I get in a few of the other points that I thought were. I did want to make sure that I got in because I didn't really know a whole lot about Nella Larsen. I hadn't read any of her books. Was never motivated or even curious to read any of her books. Passing, quicksand, none of the above. And nor was I about learning her life. And I found out, oh wow, she went down to Tuskegee, Alabama, again, years before the Tuskegee experiment got rolling. She didn't know Nurse Rivers, none of that. She also went to Fisk. I didn't know that. She also, as you heard, now her father leaves. They don't know what happened to him. He could have been lynched, killed, who knows. He leaves. Mother remarries a white man. This white man, race soldier, boots her to the curb. Now again, color line? That's the most accurate to describe all this? He's upset. You got this little nigger girl here. Let's get rid of her. And she ends up not even being around the family. Again, this is Chicago when they're like, this is, in fact, at the time that Nella Larsen is born, late 1900s, I think it's 1891 specifically, I think he said Chicago, they only had like 1% of their population was black. I mean, think about that. They're doing the, I forgot how many years I think it's like 40 years. Is it 40 years? I think it might be 40 years. It's been a long time since Harold Washington, first black mayor of Chicago. They're doing celebration and all of that for him right now. That's like late 80s or early 80s. That's what I said. I think it's been like 40 years, something approximately. But that's crazy to think of Chicago not being, so-called chocolate city, tacky, delectable Negro metaphor. But 1% of the population at the time that she got there. So they are solidifying we're going to warehouse the niggers here and terrorize them to death. Fire traps and all of it. They are solidifying that. And the influx of black people running, thinking they're going to get away from racism, white supremacy, and find warmth of other suns, that hasn't even really started yet at this point. So it's kind of seeing a much earlier version, but you still got Satan's, make sure I get it again, Satan's Mile and Coon Hollow. And I mean, we've seen that over and over and over, and talking about different regions where they locate all of the vice, drugs, and sex trafficking and all that, put that where the dark people are. And again, Colin, if that's the case, what are you all doing over here in Coon Hollow? Over and over again. That's why I started with Minister Malcolm. Next. Other things I was going to make sure we talked about. I said Peter Larson, so that's the white stepfather, race soldier who comes in, and she's got to get out of here. Let's see. Separate color line barriers. These are terms that he uses throughout the text. I also thought it was fascinating. Nella Larsen, just like Essie Mae Washington-Williams for people who are with us in the book club, Essie Mae is a nurse at first. Then she switches, becomes a teacher. Then writes that book too. Nella Larsen is a nurse. I said she was down at Tuskegee, but she's a nurse in New York at the time of the Spanish flu epidemic. In fact, let me see if I can share that one. Let me go. This is on, I'll tell you the page number once I get there. Alicia, I was super prepped and ready to roll. It would not have improved. It would have just continued in the same vein for Dr. Hutchinson. He'd even have to reveal truth or dip, exit in a real tacky manner for Dr. Hutchinson. Let's see. So this is in the middle of, make sure I get the correct page here. Let's see. Oh, and they talk about the different riots that they had in Chicago. This covers so many of the interesting parts of U.S. history, like turn of the 20th century. All right, so here's the part about the flu that resonated at least with what's happening right now for me. She says, or Dr. Hutchinson, race soldier suspect, writes, instead the flu came back. It resumed again and again into the early months of 1919. And the nurses of the health department went back to the bedside nursing. The epidemic cost more American lives in 4 months than all the wars the United States has fought to this day. It produced armies of orphans. It scared many thousands of Americans more deeply than the war that supposedly produced the lost generation. And then, like a trauma too difficult to absorb, it nearly vanished from national memory. Skip a little bit. Amazingly, the nurses held up against the disease. Larson herself, who in later years would be particularly susceptible to the flu, colds, pneumonia, did take 4 days off, probably for illness, in mid-January 1919. But in her bureau, as of December, at least none died. In the most devastating early months of the crisis, only 2 nurses came down with pneumonia and 4 with the flu. Their techniques and gauze masks had proven their worth. The nurses of the Bureau of Preventable Diseases were regarded as the heroes of the crisis in New York, which had more casualties than any other city in the United States, but half the death rate of most, mainly because of the effectiveness of the nurses. I thought that was amazing. Again, I didn't know Nella Larsen was a nurse, but I didn't know anything about her at all except for books I hadn't read. And wow, this book was published way before any of the COVID happened. So this is not some, let me try and tie it in or what have you. This came out way before all that. So, just wow. Many of the parallels. I don't know if they had social media back then to be, suspicious about everything, and the like some things change, some things do not. New York's still the epicenter. They do have a pretty big population though. Let's see. Make sure I get out some of the things that I thought were important. Let me tell you how crazy this is in terms of, even though he was only here for a short period, I can only conclude based on doing my work, reading this book, all of the things we were supposed, this happened as it was supposed to. I generally take these as signs that I was supposed to check out this material. So this is on page, let's see, the page number, where's the page number at for this? 46 of Dr. Hutchinson, Suspected Racist. Page 46, he writes, an important factor in Chicago, he's talking about, was the use of African Americans as strikebreakers in Southside labor disputes beginning in the 1890s, right when she's born, Nella Larsen. Gradually, an automatic association of Negro with scab developed in white workers' minds, especially after a failed stockyard strike in 1904. In the aftermath of the conflict, I said, you got to be joking. You have got to be joking. In the aftermath of the conflict, U.S. Senator Ben Pitchfork Tillman, Democrat, South Carolina, came up to Chicago to address the defeated strikers, telling them the black workers were the source of their problem. Supported by a city alderman, he harped on the threats of miscegenation and amalgamation. Finally, he announced it was the niggers that whipped you into line. They were the club with which your brains were beaten out, if you ever had any. Now, we've been talking about Ben Tillman for, I don't even know, book club, go all the way back to 2015, and then he's mentioned every other page in Essie Mae Washington-Williams. Wow. And they want to talk about Pitchfork Ben Tillman goes, violence against black people follows, even in Chicago. Let's see, what else did I think was important? 141, we talked about this for years on the program. Justice was a guest on the program for years, when she was 10, starting out back on the broadcast. And the reason for that, her presence at 10 even, hey, super important that we talk about racism, white supremacy, and do so in a manner that is accurate, so that, hey, the next generation can be less confused. Hey, eventually that will be the generation to solve this problem permanently. That's what we're looking for. Permanent solution to the problem. So we're not reading about Nella Larsen 100 years from now with sitting in the same position that she was. Nella Larsen, she's a nurse. That doesn't work out. She goes to Fisk, briefly gets kicked out. She has kind of a rebellious nature about her, which I can appreciate. She was upset about some of their kind of prudish dress code standards. But even that, at like Fisk and Tuskegee, where they had some of these stipulations and things, even that is a response to white supremacy racism. It would just be called, I guess, respectability politics, which you still hear a lot of today, pull your pants up and all that. Not that I'm, encouraging sagging, but just saying, like, none of these things are why black people are mistreated. Not because we're wearing the incorrect clothes or we're not respectable or we don't have class. That none of that is related to the problem. The problem is individuals classified as white, like Dr. Hutchinson, practicing white supremacy racism in a variety of ways, much of it incorrect use of words. Now, Nella Larsen, the nursing situation doesn't work out, so she goes to New York, or she goes overseas for a little while. She comes back. She hangs out in New York. She ends up being the first black person to go through their library training program, even though she doesn't get credit for this later on, but big deal. Library, and I'm not being facetious about that. It is a big deal. Like, libraries are super important, and race. I mean, we just heard in Essie Mae Washington-Williams where she said, hey, I found out that I have a white father at the age of 16, so I start going to the library to read. Who is Ben Tillman? Who is my dad? Let me, read about the history of racism, white supremacy, really, and the history of the state of South Carolina. Going to the library, super important. So Nella Larsen, she goes to library school, in New York, graduates, first black person to do so. Bravo. And so then she's at the library in New York. She works on a children's section at the library. This is like, she's foundational in all of this. Like I said, I didn't know any of this. Reading directly from the book. This is page 128. Sojourn in Harlem, the dawn of the Harlem Renaissance. Founded by W.E.B. Du Bois and Auguste Granville Dill, the Brownies book was the world's first monthly magazine for black children, the first even to think of black children as an audience, and the first publication for which Nella Larsen wrote. It aimed to make colored children realize that being colored is a normal, beautiful thing, and to convey the history of black achievement while teaching colored children a code of honor and action in their relations with white children. biography editors also wished to teach universal love and brotherhood for all little folks, asking adults what foreign countries you would like described, briefly what dark children, and white too for that matter, for we colored people must set the example of broadness, are doing all over the world. Now that rhetorical ethic, we've talked about that in the universalism, talked about that before. Marimba Ani, Dr. Marimba Ani in Yurugu, she talks about all that specifically, where we have to try to make sure that there's no black racism. Remember I said that, where he said white racism, and that's something I point out all the time. I never say white racism, because invariably someone will come, oh, well, we got some non-white racism and black racism. Not at all. And even in this book, black people are described as being prejudiced. That's what I mean. Stop all of that. We're in a system of white supremacy racism, period. The people who are to be held accountable, always classified as white. Dr. Hutchinson. But all this, super important about her work at the library, and then the work around children. She did lots, coming in and setting up children's sections and encouraging children to read and getting them library cards and all the rest of it, which was groundbreaking. People were not doing this at this time period. Just amazing. We learn a little bit about everything. I think Mr. Fuller encourages that. Let's see. Okay, then let me get some of the portions where I was like, yeah, this is things that would need to be called out in terms of Dr. Hutchinson practicing racism, white supremacy within this text, I suspect, deliberately so. This is, just try to get the page number. All right, so this is on page bottom of 37 going to 38. He writes, Larson began her public education at Mosley School, 2 blocks south and 2 blocks east of her home in Chicago. It was a large school in an aging building with more than 1,300 pupils, nearly 1/3 of them missing on an average school day, and about as many failing to be promoted from one year to the next. On this measure, Mosley was one of the least successful schools in the system. Still, each classroom had more than 50 students on an average day, the vast majority being natives of Europe or children of immigrants. In these years before 1905, by most accounts, white and black pupils got along tolerably well, whatever that means, white man writing this, in schools like Mosley, playing together and forming friendships in the early grades. One can assume this was so with Larson, who always had white friends, in later life, and was never as inclined as most African Americans to hold white people at arm's length. Now that last sentence, that was, highlight all of that. One, we got a memoir, hold white people at arm's length. What does that even mean? That's what I mean, really, like Dr. Hutchinson, break it down for me. What does that mean? Hold white people at arm's length. And particularly for this time period, I mean, they're still lynching black people on a regular basis. In fact, the time period that he's talking about, Zachariah Walker, had just been lynched. That's 1911. So he had just been lynched. However, many other people, John Carter, that was the one we talked about, Willie Earl, Emmett Till, Scottsboro Boys hasn't even happened yet. Like, there are many prominent cases that haven't even taken place. I think some of the victims in the Scottsboro Boys case haven't even been born. The time period that we're talking about, like late 1800s, early 1900s. In fact, rewind, Zachariah Walker is still alive at this point, because this is before 1911. So, I mean, what do you mean? Most African, and I mean, there's no footnote here. So, I mean, what are you talking about, Dr. Hutchinson? Are you suggesting that at this time that most African Americans were suspicious of white people? If so, is there anything incorrect about that? Now, pause. I asked him, is it logical for non-white people to be suspicious of anyone classified as white, even you? And he said, yep. So, is there a problem? In fact, it should even go the other way around. Should Nella Larsen have been, if you want to use his words, should she have been holding white people at arm's length? Should she have been more suspicious of white people? Like I said, I don't even know what this means. Like, what? Continuing, Let's see, because it's a bunch of these in the text like that. Let's see. Let's give another one. This is page 22. Let's see. To many, back up here. Okay, so he talks about frequently Nella Larsen. She has a white parent now, but frequently she would not support, and many other people did, even black people who had 2 black parents and 4 black grandparents, did not support the idea of having a black hospital because they felt at that time racists would just say, oh, you've got a nigger hospital, so you don't need access to our good hospital, that type of a thing. So you had some black people who said, forget it, they're going to be racist, we just need to have our own institute, Tuskegee, that type of thing. Or we should have access to everything because they're going to put us in inferior hospitals, schools, on down the line. No, we can't have Negro anything because it'll always be inferior. We need to be able to have access to everything. We're born here with citizens. We should have access to same access that every citizen of the country has. Those are kind of 2 competing schools of thought, both responses to white supremacy racism. So he writes, and they're having this conflict about a hospital. The episode epitomizes the tactical dilemma African Americans face during a watershed period in the racial history of Chicago. Should one push for total integration of civic institutions, that word integration, recognizing the existence of de facto segregation, opt for development of separate institutions in order to provide opportunities otherwise denied the city's black citizens? To many, the latter course threatened to play into the hands of the Jim Crow movement that was rapidly engulfing the nation. At the political heart of that movement was the attempt to maintain white supremacy. Finally gets the word. At its socio-psychological core was a need to control women's sexuality in the interests of race. Now, he asked me that. Well, how do you define race? How do you define a white person? I was like, hey, man, you're not just going to ask me a bunch of questions. That was a fascinating exchange even for 20 minutes, like the amount of material. Because that as well, when white people switch it around like I'm ignorant, this white man is a professor at an Ivy League institution. You are not confused about race. And in fact, that's another one where that's not what we're talking about, so-called race. We're talking about white supremacy, racism. That's one that Fuller even uses. The problem isn't race, it is racism, white supremacy. I'm just switching around because I've heard, actually, I'm not accustomed to hearing Neely Fuller Jr. say it. I'm accustomed to hearing Bill Rhoden, and he quotes Mr. Fuller all the time on his Brothers on Sports, where they're talking about entertainment, but he'll quote Mr. Fuller all the time. Full name, Neely Fuller Jr. The problem is not race, it is racism, white supremacy, for sure. But he said that. What do you mean race? What do you explain as a white person? He continues, interest of race, and thus to make such persons as Nellie Walker. That bothered me too. He's real casual with names. Now he does do some naming of white people in this book on a first name basis, but that just bothers me anytime a white author, really anybody, because I don't do that, but to have a white author writing and describing someone on a first name basis. You don't hear me calling Neely Fuller Jr. Neely or Marimba Marimba or anything like that. Dr. Francis. You don't hear me doing that. In fact, the only one where I can say, oh, yes, you did, because it's Essie Mae, and the reason is Washington-Williams is kind of lengthy, and we also are reading about the part of the book where she is still in her child phase. But yeah, and normally when I say Essie Mae, I normally put the Miss Essie Mae on it, but it's generally just, Washington-Williams. I mean, that is quite a bit to say, as opposed to Larson. Anyway, he references her on a first name basis, and a number of other people, white and non-white, in the book on a first name basis, and that's just Anywho, I'll start it again. At its social psychological core was a need to control women's sexuality in the interests of race, and thus to make persons such as Nellie Walker impossible, to institute an absolute chasm between black and white identity. He has identity only in quotes. That chasm, which had a long history already, helped define 20th century America. It nurtured separate institutions, separate neighborhoods, separate mentalities, loyalties to separate races, thought of as extended families, all of which in their complicated interrelations could only be mixed, even while antagonistic to one another in fierce struggles for power and survival. All of that. That's what I mean about just confusion. Again, if we've got all this separation, we shouldn't have Coon Hollow. We shouldn't have all these white people, like the scene that we started with in the audio clip, who are coming down to the Negro hangouts to dance, white women and white men. If we've got all of this separate, Strom Thurmond, get your penis out of that 15-year-old. Thomas Jefferson, get your penis out of that 15-year-old. And we don't have separate institutions because he, in the book, he writes about it, this exact time period, those Negro colleges that we keep referencing as bomb threats, the same Negro institutions that are described in Dear Senator Essie Mae Washington-Williams' memoir, South Carolina State College at that time, now University, and Claflin, which bomb threat victim among dozens. These institutions are not separate either. Most of them, maybe all, that are named after an individual are named after individuals classified as white, and many of the staff at these institutions were also individuals classified as white. In fact, that is the case even to this day. So I have no idea what anybody, including Dr. Hutchinson, what are you even talking about? Separate, separate, separate. That is not what we have, and all of that is about confusion. This is about a power dynamic between individuals who say they are white and the folks that they say are niggers. That's what we're talking about. A major component. Underline it, highlight it. This right here, exactly why he stormed off. If anybody who, heard that, dang, gosh, you were rude and surly, and, you need to get a little bit more rest or drink less. I had 3 cups of coffee today, so it could be, Gus is super caffeinated and, calm down, black brother. All that talking about, drinking more water. I have water right here, by the way, because caffeine does dehydrate you. So if you are going to get on your Java roll, drink extra. In fact, it shouldn't just be drink your normal about. You should drink extra water. But you can feel free to let me know if I've just been grumpy. The folks who are with us, you can share a thought or two. I just want to make sure I go through and pick out some of the other important segments from the text, and just highlighting these are the reasons why I think he left. These are why this is why I was making a point of words and what have you that he uses in the text. Let's see, get another one. Give you the page number really quick. And it's still white guests only. That's exactly why. I would much rather have it be white guests only than have a non-white person sitting here and trying to tell me, Gus, you old coon, you don't know what you're talking about. It is separation. It is Jim Crow. And white privilege is right. And remember, Cool in the Gang. Victims guaranteed qualified. If it's going to be a guest getting angry or what have you and stomping off, let it be someone classified as white who has agreed. Yep, system of white supremacy, agreed that my definition was correct and agreed it's logical to be suspicious of anyone, including him, who's classified as white. I would much rather have it be that way than some victim stomping off. Coon, Gus, I'm never talking that coon again. Yeah. Let's see. This one. Page 86. He writes, see, Nella Larsen herself later reported that all infractions of rules and instances of neglect of duty were reported to and dealt with by the superintendent of nurses, who was white. Being specific, that's what I mean. It used to distress the old folks that we Negroes had to tell things about each other to white people. One Mrs. Christopher in particular used to say over and over that if the Negro race, we're not members of a race, if the Negro race would only stick together, we might get somewhere someday, and that what the white folks didn't know about us wouldn't hurt us. All this used to amuse me, Larson added, possibly playing to her predominantly white audience, and possibly not. She was never much for holding the barrier between the races, let alone shoring it up. There's many things I could say about a passage like that. Now, we do have some direct quotes here, and that's why I said individuals like Dr. Hutchinson, many individuals classified as white, they are so skilled and refined. This white man he studies the Negro. You heard him, Harlem Renaissance, Nella Larsen, written many books on all of these folks. He's not ignorant. To come in, you can quote her with all this. Now, I said you can start from the very beginning. Hey, well, let me go back all the way up here. We heard this exactly from Essie Mae Washington-Williams. All of the white people are in charge. I think she talked about one black person who did ultimately get that position. She was like the first or what have you at the hospital in New York. Essie Mae, was that New York? Yep, in New York, where she went to live with her brother. Got it right the first time. But she was saying the same thing. They wouldn't put black people in positions of authority or what have you. They say the same thing. 2022, we are today. Then she said that I guess some of the black people, they felt some type of way about having to share all their business with white people. I totally understand that. If it's 1891, 1991, 2021, I totally understand. However, Neely Fuller Jr. has said, and I agree completely, hey, ain't gonna be no secrets from Dr. Hutchinson at all. They study the Negro at Cornell, Syracuse, Stanford, Harvard. They study the Ivy Leagues. They study the Negro. So it's not going to be any secrets. I think we've been confused about that for a long time. This whole, the Negro race, that is such a powerful concept. It is totally flawed. We do not belong to a race, and that leads to a whole lot of frustration. And there's so much of that in the book. Just black. I mean, hey, now this is going through the era of Marcus Garvey, who's mentioned, and W.E.B. Du Bois. These folks are mentioned all throughout the text. I mean, hey, or maybe you don't know, but lots of brawling between those two, and that's standard. Non-white people being in conflict with each other. It's tons of that. In the book, non-white people bickering, arguing with each other about their views on white supremacy, racism. We're not a race. We're not members of a race. We are just a group of individuals who have been subjugated and are trying to figure our way out of this problem. But we are not members of a race. The only reason to belong to a race is to practice racism, white supremacy. And that's going back to the question that I asked Dr. Hutchinson. So who is in charge of all this? Oh, it's white people. Got it. They're the ones who told us we're part of the Negro race or the black race or the African American race or whatever they call it. They told us that, and then we latch on to that and then get mad with other members of our race who are traitors. Folly all the way through. Larson said this used to amuse me. And he says she was never up for holding the barrier between the races, let alone shoring it up. But I don't know what you're talking about there. There are no quotes there. There's no footnotes. That's all Dr. Hutchinson. Larson was never much for holding the barrier between the races. Races, that's one. And then two, what are you talking about? Now you can say, hey, I'm an English professor. I'm into language. In my view, language is subjective, but the most important component, being accurate. You do not want readers being confused about what we're even talking about. Again, if there were barriers between the races, divisions, you used that word earlier, Strom Thurmond, get your penis out of that child. Thomas Jefferson, Jerry Sandusky, how many of those do we need to add? Mary Kay Letourneau, get that one in too. You got to get some white women. You have to give me some white women so that I'm not being, we call that, I was going to say heteronormative, but that's not it. Just being sexist, just focusing exclusively on white men who do this, and white women do the same thing. That's talked about in the book. At least I did get that in the sound clip. White women do the same thing. Barriers, separation, division. This is a power, and we just don't get that. It's not about seven. That's how you end up with lots of people thinking what will solve this problem is, guess who's coming to dinner? Nella Larsen. If we can, what is it that Claudia Rankin says? super popular, gets paid billions to go around and talk about racism. We just need these white women to start having little black babies. What? How did President Obama get here? This problem would have been solved a long time ago if all we needed was to hop in bed together. If all we needed was black people and white people to come together, whatever that means, stand in the same room, same bed, same bathroom, whatever that means. Power dynamic. That's what we're talking about. White people having a power dynamic where they dominate non-white people, all areas of people activity, all over the known universe forever. That's what we're talking about. Not separation. And that's so tacky. And I mean, it's 2022. All of us should be beyond that. That's why I said, like, Jim Crow and all of that. If you're going to talk about racism, white supremacy, just my suggestion as a non-white person, like Jim Crow, separation, the color line, all of these are really poor, inaccurate terms that probably racists came up with. They created these concepts because they're inaccurate. They give you a flawed understanding and a flawed way of talking about what this problem is. You want a deliberate way to make sure people don't solve a problem. Make sure they are never able to accurately articulate, this is the problem we're trying to solve. If you can keep that muddled, you will be confused forever, maybe. If we can't just say, what is 2 plus? I mean, if you could just say, what is 2 plus 2? You might not even have to figure it out. You might have somebody just comes by and says, oh, 4. That's all we're trying to do? 4. Next. If you can't articulate, that's what we're trying to figure out. It's hard to help when you can't articulate, man. That's why people get frustrated, too. Continuing. Let's see. What else did I think was really important? And then I guess I get off. I'll get two that I thought were really important in terms of people, and then passing, and then I'll check, see if folks have any thoughts that they would like to share. So in terms of people, at least in my view, because Nella Larsen does marry a black male, Elmer Imes, I hope I'm pronouncing his last name correctly, Elmer Imes, her husband's name, but he does, killing me, Elmer Imes, feverish. He ends up leaving her for a white woman who is employed at Fisk, no less. So he leaves her eventually, leaves her for this white woman who I guess was really liked, I guess, by the students there for whatever reason. Many victims are very confused about racism, white supremacy, and it doesn't take a whole lot to get non-white people confused or to like a white person, especially the white woman that Nella Larsen's husband left her for. Ethel Gilbert is her name. She was a faculty member at Fisk, and she's noted to have loaned black students money and been, just a really well-meaning, super friendly white person. So I guess apparently it was rumored, like on campus, that they knew about this affair. Like, oh man, he's cheating on Nella Larsen with this white woman. And I guess some of the black students allegedly were, supportive because they like this white woman so much. That could be, could be a lie. It totally could be true. Many, many victims are very confused about racism, white supremacy. And again, what separation? What are you even talking about? Barriers? What barriers? Let's see. But anyway, so yeah, her husband ends up leaving her. And I think some of that is articulated, like her anxiety, and understandably so. Her husband's infidelity with this white woman coming through in passing, which I'll get to as well. But I think the person who's most important in this book in terms of in Nella Larsen's life is Carl Van Vechten, white man. He's an author. He wrote the book Nigger Heaven, which is talked about regularly in the book, and the influence that it had. That right, and even the segment that is in passing that I started with, the scene where Irene is talking to Hugh Wentworth, and he's asking her, well, what do you think about these white people who come down here to gaze at the Negro? Do you think it's prejudice? And what's up with all that? And my white wife is out here with all these Ethiopians and has lost her mind and, she's even forgotten that she's married and I'm here and blah, 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 and all the rest of it. That character is supposed to be a composite, based on what Dr. Hutchinson wrote, of two different white people, one of them being Carl Van Vechten. As I said, he wrote this book, Nigger Heaven, which has got all this debauchery and, supposed to be frolicking and what have you, that allegedly he even comes to be like, oh man, that's, maybe I should have wrote that, and allegedly he feels bad about it. I've concluded that white people do not feel guilty about practicing racism, certainly not a book depicting Negroes in some sort of sexual debauchery and what have you, and saying that this is uplift of the race. That's, pretty common. They call that hustle and flow now. Remember that one? Terrence Howard, remember that one? So Carl Van Vechten, let me give you a good passage on Carl Van Vechten from the text. And then we'll maybe test out the switchboard before we wrap up, just to make sure that it is working correctly today. Missed out on folks from before. So this is on page the bottom of 193. Yeah, I'll give you quite a bit on this one. So this is 193. Larson had many reasons to relish Carl Van Vechten's company. He was, of course, an important contact, one of the great talent scouts of the 20th century, but his literary tastes also had much in common with hers. Having been born and raised in conservative Cedar Rapids, Iowa, a misfit outre fascinations and budding homosexual inclinations, he was peculiarly sensitive to creative people who felt wary or misunderstood. He was an amusing, generous, and imaginative host, known for his flamboyant, self-parodying costumes around those issues that usually demand intense seriousness to the point of hypocrisy, race, and sex. He was always testing boundaries, inspiring people at risk of offending them to loosen up. Moreover, he liked Larson and admired her intelligence. Sensitive about being a parvenu in the black bourgeoisie, Larson found in Van Vechten a different conduit to recognition and self-affirmation. Moreover, Larson and Van Vechten had plenty to talk about. As a student at the University of Chicago at the turn of the century, when Larson was living on State Street in Chicago, he had witnessed the performances of the black musical greats Bert Williams, George Walker, and Ada Overton in State Street resorts. He had even filled in at the piano once or twice at the Everleigh Sisters brothel at 22nd and Dearborn, and could still remember the fountain in its foyer. A reporter for the Chicago Inter-Ocean and the Chicago American between 1903 and 1906, Van Vechten was full of stories about Nella Larsen's old stomping grounds, and he had long been interested in black culture, much like Dr. Hutchinson. Nonetheless, the distrust some Harlemites felt toward him was not entirely undeserved. Double negative, that's one that I point out, not entirely undeserved, was logical, reasonable, grounded. There are lots of more efficient ways. And that's what I say. That's the tendency when white people write, as opposed to just being efficient and revealing truth about racism, white supremacy with as few words as possible. They obfuscate, and deliberately so. And this is not just one person. I see this all the time with that double negative. That's like basic kindergarten English. They tell you you're not supposed to be including double negatives. It's difficult for me to even think of one in a sentence because it's confusing. Do not, I can't even think, I have to take some while to think of one in a sentence other than the one that I just read you. Not entirely undeserved. You wouldn't do that. You would just say grounded, reasonable, logical. He told H.L. Mencken in mid-1925, jazz, the blues, Negro spirituals all stimulate me enormously. Interest to stimulate. Doubtless I shall discard them too in time. In parentheses, Van Vechten did not. In fact, his interest deepened and lasted until he died, into parentheses. A self-described opportunist and provocateur, he was also a compulsive cataloger and collector. In the mid-20s, Van Vechten's serious engagement with black culture did not prevent him from voicing stereotypical notions. He didn't say racist. He said stereotypical notions of Negro primitivism that were common to the era and that he himself would repudiate later, allegedly. Nor was Larson immune to some of these same notions. Into parentheses. For better or worse, Larson Larson's life was deeply affected by her friendship with Carl and his wife Fania, and from the time that she grew close to them, much of her social and professional identity was connected to theirs. This fact may well damage Larson's reputation even today, because in the minds of many, Van Vechten is still regarded as the perfect example of the white cultural vampire, or at the very least, a pathological voyeur. Larson's relationship to him is widely regarded as either a symptom of her poor judgment or an elaborate confidence game. In truth, like many friendships, it was a little bit of both, yet much, much more. Huge one for many reasons. One, the word white cultural vampire. That immediately reminded me of The Delectable Negro. A couple mentions here today already, where he has a passage in the book, Vincent Woodard, which is very similar. And he talks about and I think he uses the word vampiric. I think that's what it is. The vampiric nature of white culture, where they just come in and like the mythological vampire and suck the life force. And I mean everything, the bone, the marrow, the gristle, everything, totally devouring you. And I think that's depicted in passing with the character. And even interesting, his name is Hugh. Now, I think they spell it H-U-G-H, but I mean, Hugh is in H-U-E color. And then even his last name is Wentworth. This is the character in the book Passing. Wentworth is the street in Chicago. I think one of the streets where they terrorized the niggers or what have you. So all that really interesting. But this Van Vechten figure, there were lots of Dr. Hutchinson quotes from lots of black people in the book who point this out at the time, who saw what this guy was doing and writing all this debauchery in Nigger Heaven, the book, writing all this debauchery and saying, hey, this guy is a racist. Like, we've seen this. Malcolm X talked about this in his autobiography. We've seen all of this. Why are you hanging out with him? And I mean, that's the person more than anyone in this book that is like over 500 pages. That's the person that she's corresponding with most. And I mean, letters and what have you, I guess if they were able to recover telegrams and letters between Nella Larsen and her black husband, non-white husband, maybe they would have more information, what have you. But what we got here is lots and lots of correspondence between Nella Larsen, Carl Van Vechten, this white cultural vampire. And she had a white parent. It's been my experience. Non-white people in general are very confused about white people. It's been my experience. Non-white people do not keep white people at arm's length, to use his metaphor. And it's been my experience. Most non-white people don't even have the power to keep white people at arm's length, even if they wanted to, whatever that means. But non-white people who have a white parent frequently can be even more confused because they have an emotional attachment. We're reading Dear Senator right now, can be even more confused about that, and that white validation and wanting white friends and what have you can be very common. And Nella Larsen, she had a difficult experience, like most victims of white supremacy, and being abandoned by her family. As I said, her racist white stepfather comes in, and so she can't even have contact with her family. Everybody needs human contact, right? Companionship, all that is super important. Just unfortunately, a lot of times, it is the white cultural vampire who comes in to, and this guy's into all his homosexual, anti-sex debauchery and everything else. Like, really, one of his homies ends up managing Josephine Baker. Like, I can get you his name if we proceed, but I mean, that's what you end up with, just a whole lot of tacky arrangements. He talks about her dancing around in Paris with bananas on, and best you can get. White cultural vampirism, and worldwide. Not just, and they say that, hey, Josephine Baker, she had to go overseas to be a star, to wear a banana skirt and dance nude. Get overtures to be a concubine. That's making it success. Isn't that the word they put on it? Yes. Let me give you one more white person. lots of talk about the NAACP in this book for this time period when it's first being formed. Like I said, W.E.B. Du Bois and all these other, Booker T. Washington down at Tuskegee and all this at this time period, and lynchings. So NAACP is doing lots, working on lynchings. Walter White, he's writing The Rope and Faggot, his book about lynching and his work with the NAACP. He's meeting Nella Larsen and all these folks that are hanging out in New York, Harlem Renaissance, 1920s and forward. She writes, or even he has a letter where Joel E. Spingarn and Nella Larsen are having correspondence where she's telling him about a book that she's not going to translate into English. And I think this is like some raunchy French literature. She's not going to translate it. And I was going to ask him, like, what do you know about Joel E. Spingarn? Because his name has come up over and over and over, particularly in the book club, on the Cows, all the way back to the Little Rock Nine. They have awards named after him and all that. So I was going to ask him, like, what do you know about Joel Spingarn? And then wait to see. Now, again, Dr. Hutchinson, this is a white man, Ivy League professor. You've written all these books. You got Joel Spingarn in your book where you went through. Tell us what you know about him. Wait and see. I'll say, oh, okay. Now, my suspicion would be that he does know this information, but he would not have told us because in my view, this is one of those, hey, Dr. Hutchinson, in addition to your tacky exit from the program, you not including this information I'm reading from Stephen Tompkins' report in 1917, spy target was Black America. Now, this very much reminds me of Dr. Kenneth O'Reilly's book, which I just mentioned, Racial Matters, the FBI's secret file on Black America from 1960 to 1972. He talks about this started way before 1960. You just get the COINTELPRO operation specifically where they refine what they're looking for. But I mean, in terms of spying on niggers, that's old as Methuselah. Get my biblical metaphor in. You heard that one? So Joel E. Spingarn, the report I just said, Stephen Tompkins, Lieutenant Colonel Ralph Van Diemen. I even thought that is wild. His name is spelled D-E-M-A-N. Demon, I don't know, but I mean, getting close to the truth with the spelling. Lieutenant Colonel Demon wanted proof of subversion, not moral judgments. He hired Joel E. Spingarn, the white board chairman of the NAACP, and made him a major in the Military Intelligence Division. In May 1918, Joel E. Spingarn and Black agent Lieutenant T. Montgomery Gregory ran a small unit of undercover agents, according to intelligence documents. The documents show Spingarn, who remained NAACP chairman during his tenure at the MID, Military Intelligence Division, used his post to obtain critical information for MID, such as a list of the organization's 32,000 members. The NAACP gives an annual award named for Spingarn. Opening private mail became second nature. During World War I, MID opened 100,000 pieces of mail a week and surreptitiously subscribed to more than 60 black publications. This is at a time where you didn't even have, it's the beginning of the 20th century. Before World War II, before the Depression even, before the 20s. How many black publications do you even have? None of that information is in the book about Joel Spingarn. He's just mentioned, reference. He's one of the people that Nella Larsen is talking to again. Now, hey, black people keeping white people at arm's length. Do you want to have white friends who might also be working for the Military Intelligence Division's Negro Spy Program? Do you want to be kicking it with white homosexuals who just love to hang out with the Negro? Maybe it would be better to keep them all at arm's length, whatever that means. In fact, scratch that. Maybe it would better be suspicious of everyone classified as white. Even Dr. Hutchinson, and hey, he did agree to that before he left. One of his other cute ones, The Institution of Race. Oh, he has that one in the book so many times. The Institution of Race. I don't even know what that means. Is that a place? Can we go visit the Institution of Race? What are their hours? Do you have to wear a mask to enter the Institution of Race? And I mean, he has that like verbatim in the book at least 4 different times and then other iterations, but the Institution of Race. Let's see. I'll get 2 in and then I'll get a few thoughts in on passing, and then I'll get this one in right here. I'll check to see if folks have any thoughts they would like to share. *61 if you have a comment or question. As I said, the switchboard was broken on Saturday. Maybe it's working today. Maybe it's not.
Q&A session has started.
Chapter. It's all right. We shall see. It was not working for some reason on Saturday. We'll see if it's working today. So on page 339, Dr. Hutchinson, he writes, oh, now see, I see a hand. Wasn't doing that on Saturday for some reason, or maybe it was, and I just wasn't, wasn't functioning correctly. Let's see. This is on page, like I said, this book is 500 pages. Like, I sat there on a tumultuous week. My God, I told you all on Saturday, like I thought my computer was going to explode. Like I had to go do double duty. Like I even thought about saying, man, like it's been so crazy. Like maybe I should reschedule or even cancel with Dr. Hutchinson. My computer is about to explode. I said on Saturday, they suspended my Twitter account. I couldn't even get on Black Talk Radio Network. It was just an avalanche. The switchboard wasn't working. Like piles and piles and piles and piles and all this other stuff. I thought I was going to have to send my computer in for repairs yesterday. Like, oh my goodness, got to make sure I get the book because I had the e-copy. So I was like, I got to make sure I get the book, switch to my other computer so I won't lose my highlights and my notes and everything that I had organized. And all of this counter racist grind. I said I got my 3 cups of coffee. Let's get on the grind. The way things are going, I have no idea. Like, computer could explode and kill us all tomorrow. So let's get down right now. I'm here to get down, and I'm going to play around for 20 minutes. Who is this Negro questioning me? I'm going to interrupt him, and he's going to have some black self-respect and not let me talk over him? Yeah. Let me give one more that he wrote in here. It's 500 pages of this, but I mean, to be able to go through and read, like, oh man, especially if you understand white supremacy, racism, and the importance of words, and when white people are not being accurate with the words that they use, like, whew, it sticks out quite a bit. This one I thought was hugely important. Well, I was looking forward to asking him about this one. This is on page number 326. Okay, so Boston, Malcolm X's stomping grounds. She writes, the usually loquacious Walter, who had sat silent through practically the entire interview, gamely wished her good luck with passing, adding, I hope it's a bestseller. I hope it's banned in Boston. Banned books out there. Anyway, it won't be, said Miss Larson. I'm much too innocuous to get banned anywhere, and don't go insinuating things against Boston. I love Boston. I don't think there's any place in the world where a colored person can come and go with more complete absence of embarrassment. And that's it. I thought she was going to say mistreatment. That's not what she said. This is all direct quote from her, what she said. Complete absence of embarrassment. People are delightful there. I have so many friends who feel just the same way, who have a very special feeling for Boston. I guess pause for Charles Stewart. Matter of fact, scratch that. You can pause for Charles Stewart. That's the white man who in 1989 killed his pregnant wife and blamed it on a nigger male, and they tore up the whole black section of town. Sure, that was lovely. I'm sure the black people loved Boston at that time. They got all that on color video footage. You can watch that on YouTube, but scratch that. Pause for Ted Landsmark. There we go. I guess you could pause for New Edition. Some of our cows, let's just say, whenever I think of Boston, I think of New Edition. That is not Gus T. Ted Landsmark. So when they were going to bust the niggers in Boston, white people came out in droves. And this was 1970s. This is like 50, 60 years later after what Nella Larsen is talking about. And they came out and said, forget that. If you're going to let these nigger children go to school, well, let the niggers have it. They came out again in color. But in black and white, the photo of the year, in the midst of all this, Ted Lansmark, black male, he was like, hey, education, that's what we need, right? We're all human beings. I love Boston. They grabbed an American flag and speared him. White man, photo of the year. That's the color line. Continuing. I have so many friends that were, I don't think there's any place in the world where a colored person can come and go with more complete absence of embarrassment. People are delightful there. I have so many friends who feel just the same way, who have a very special feeling for Boston. And what about all those tables of yours in the back of that lynching book? She's talking about Walter White. Ever since, see, he said Walter, he does that so much in the book. I didn't know he was talking about it first. It was like, oh, he means Walter White. I'm not accustomed to people just referring to folks on a first name basis. You don't know these people. You're not friends with them. Anyway, Walter White, who could have passed as a white person and did sometimes to report and do his counter-racist work for the NAACP. And what about all those tables in the back of your book? That's ever since lynchings have been recorded, there's not been one in Massachusetts, only 2 in New England. You talk to me about Boston. I thought Michael Chase said Boston was the most racist city in America, like recently. Anyway, a diaphanous self-parody runs along the quasi-ethnological observations. Wait a minute. If there are, this is all Hutchinson, all his words. If there's such a thing as conversational sleight of hand, this mildly inebrious interview suggests that Larson was a master at it. A diaphanous self-parody runs alongside the quasi-ethnological observations, which are perpetually undermined by threads of doubt. It is vintage 20s chatter, outrageously downplaying the reality of Northern racism, yet testifying to it in a negative at the same time. Though she couldn't bear to read about lynchings, Larson remembered even the statistics on individual states in the back of Walter White's biography of Judge Lynch. Though she had never experienced racism firsthand, pause right there, that was one like, whoa, a white man said what? You're talking about a non-white female who was born at the end of the 19th century? She had a white parent, basically gets disowned and booted because she can't hang out with the family. She can't go visit them, like where they move. She can't go. They don't allow niggers there, so she can't go visit her white family once her white mother remarries a white man, Peter Larson. He says, Dr. Hutchinson says the census takers come to the house. They talk to him. Peter Larson says, oh, we just got white children. That nigger one, she's not even here. They don't even list her. Banished. A white man writing a biography on Nella Larsen says, though she had never experienced racism firsthand, implicitly she had never known a place where a black person could move about with complete lack of embarrassment. You're practicing white supremacy racism. Never experienced racism firsthand. Even if you want to take some of the gripes that she has about black people, her entire life is a response to white supremacy racism. Everything. I can't even go visit my parents and I've never experienced racism. They had to have a whole meeting. Are we going to allow this nigger woman to go to library school? And she's never, I don't care that they said, oh yeah, I could care less. If she had been white, none of that would have been necessary. Never experienced racism? Is there a non-white person in the known universe right now, April 26, 2022, where you could truthfully say, hey, this little fella right here, this boy right here, this girl right here, never experienced racism? Is such a person alive right now? Come on, Dr. Hutchinson. That Dr. Hutchinson knows this nonsense is all throughout the book. That's what I mean. Like you didn't read this book. You didn't spend your time. I was at the beach Sunday. I told y'all I was at the beach Saturday, which I was. I went back to the beach on Sunday reading this book. I could have really enjoyed my day. It was beautiful here Sunday, not today. It was beautiful, sunny, lovely. And I was at my favorite, or one of my favorite beaches, kicking it, coconut water and all, kicking it. It would have been even better if I didn't have to read this lame book, but it's tons of that. That's why you're not going to interrupt me when I'm talking. In particular, I'm talking about the importance of words when you got this all throughout the book. Color line this and barrier this, and she didn't experience racism. Are you serious? Black people that keep white people at arm's length. You got this all throughout the text. Passing, and then we'll see if the switchboard works. Now, Nella Larsen, her first book, Quicksand, came out in 1928. I've not read Quicksand. He talks about it. He gives a brief synopsis in the book, but I'm not familiar with that book like at all. I had highlights that I wanted to bring out because that book is talked about as being semi-autobiographical, meaning she takes some of her real lived experience, Nella Larsen, and puts them in Quicksand, which is fiction, total fiction. But there's a scene where a non-white character goes back. She tries to meet her family, white family, and they've remarried. It's kind of the same experience. And they're like, oh no, you're not related to us. Get on out of here. And it's a white woman that she's talking to. She's going back looking for, I think it's her uncle or whomever. She's like, oh no, he's not your uncle. Like, get on out of here. If he was your uncle, because this white woman is married to her person that is her uncle. It's like, if he's your uncle, that means I'm your, oh no, get on out of here, nigga woman, and don't you come back. And he was saying that he thinks that's might be based on something that actually happened to Nella Larsen. And again, if that's true, she never experienced racism. Passing, her second book comes out in 1929. And I think that one is more popular. To my knowledge, that one is very popular in terms of the academy. Dr. Hutchinson, white professors like him, and many, 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 many white women's studies programs and what have you, super popular. And many, since they don't allow black male privilege, they don't allow us to come and get degrees and what have you. So you have lots of black females. They also have been forced to read this book, and I guess you have fans and what have you. But I mean, hey, white people have promoted and pushed this book aggressively, maybe from the beginning, all the way back to Carl Van Vechten. Anywho, some non-white people have as well, but I mean, hey, who was in charge here? The book Passing comes out in 1929, same year Dr. Neely, come on. The reason I said it that way was the same year Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was born, same year Neely Floyd Jr. was born, year of the stock market crash as well. Momentous times. So 1929, Passing is published. I haven't read this book either. However, I watched the film adaptation of the book because of the book we're reading in the book club. Dear Senator, she talks about Nella Larsen and the book specifically, and she said, oh wow, this character is either pushed out the window or dies at the end. And I was like, yikes, is that in the movie? It is. Spoiler alert, sorry. So the book, which we might read in the book club, based on what I read here, seeing the movie, we might read it in the book club. I have to think. But it's basically about, you have the two main characters, Irene, Claire. Irene, non-white female. She's married to a black male. She is pale enough that she could, so-called pass, be accepted for a white person. And she does. The time that she does, she bumps into a classmate, Claire, who is a non-white female. However, she is also pale enough that she also can pass and is doing so. She is accepted as a white woman. She's married to a white man. She has one child. They meet. The white woman passing, so-called Claire, she wants to reconnect with Irene, chat it up, hang out with her, go hang out with black people and all of that. Seems like she might even have some regret about this passing thing. Incidentally, her racist husband, John, nicknames her Nig. And he explains this by saying that she was really pale when they first got married, but as she's aged, she's gotten darker. And he says, if you get any darker, you'll turn into a nigger. And says, Nig, that's what I'll call you. Ha ha ha, so funny. And so Irene is, I'm repulsed. Incidentally, I think that there's some envy, some jealousy, like maybe, she should have done the same thing. She just seems really insecure about a lot. And I think incidentally, Irene, represents quite a bit of Nella Larsen. I could be totally wrong. I've not read Passing. That's why I said I'm curious to read it now to see if that's right. But I think Irene's character is a lot of Nella Larsen. She has insecurities about her husband. I already told you that Nella Larsen's husband does have an affair and leave her for a white woman. So that element is kind of there in passing, and just lots of insecurities about addressing racism, white supremacy. Honestly, she's hanging out with this white guy all the time at these black dances and what have you. Like, it just... Anyway, so... Irene's character does not want to reconnect with Claire. Like, get out of here. You're, pretending to be a white person, jealous, insecure, all the rest of it. Get on out of here. Claire insists. She comes back. They start hanging out. Hutchinson interprets this as Claire is wanting to be black. I haven't read the book. He doesn't have any sentences to support that position. I don't think that that's accurate. He's already said there are tons of white people. They want to hang out with black people. That does not mean they want to no longer be classified as white. It just means I like coming slumming. They got lots of words for this, coon town and all the rest of it. But that does not mean that they no longer want to be classified as white. I don't think Claire wants to give up being classified as white. I just think she likes hanging out with the niggers. Many people do. Carl Van Vechten, lots of folks. So that was one. As this all goes on, and Claire keeps hanging out, and then Irene's like, oh my God, I think she's, might be having an affair with my husband, or he's interested in her. And so she's upset about that and upset about her hanging out here. It seems like, as I said, she's got some jealousy. Everybody thinks Claire is so pretty. White woman, of course. So she's got some jealousy or issues about that. They finally get to the end, and she's like, so what are you going to do if your husband finds out that you're not white? And Claire says, oh, I would just come and, live with the non-white people. No big deal. Irene is horrified. Oh my God, that would be the worst decision ever. So they're at this party. Her husband does come to the party, finds that she's there, finds out, okay, you've been lying to me. You're a nigger. You're not nig. You are a nigger. And as opposed to him assaulting her or whatever, or even Essie Mae Washington-Williams, she says that perhaps Claire jumped. There's no indication of that in the book at all, that she jumped. If you read the book, it's very clear. Irene pushes Claire out the window. So that would be a non-white female pushes a non-white female out the window as she has been discovered. You're a nigger. In fact, as she is being pushed out the window by this black female, her racist white husband yells, "Nig!" He doesn't even say nigger. Now he knows, like, it's nigger. It's not nig, it's nigra. Nig! As she splats. That's why I said when I read, because I hadn't read this book, I didn't know anything about it, like, except the passing part. I knew that, but I didn't know what happens. When I read that in Dear Senator, like, what? That's the book, and that's the book that they just made into a major motion picture film at the end of 2021. That's what we need to see right now. Black self-respect. Not that it would have been any better if the racists had threw her out the window, but I mean, a black female throws another black female out the window, and that's how it ends. Oh well. Yeah, we could have kept that back, 20th century. Like, yep, we did it. There are many, many other better films that we could make. They didn't cut a fool and have a slapping associated with that one. Nigger throws a nigger out the window. Nig, no problem. Netflix exclusive. So we might read that one just to see, because I could see why white people would promote a book like that. Be pleased about a book like that. Even Dr. Hutchinson about a book like that. And the confusion that's present. Incidentally, they specifically mentioned the lynching of John Carter in the film adaptation. He says that she wasn't interested in lynchings and all that and having that direct talk. I don't think they directly mentioned the lynching of John Carter in the book, in the written text passing, but it is in the film. And that did, I think that's 1927, 1929. The lynching of John Carter, who was dragged behind a vehicle, and delectable Negro. Anywho, if folks have read Passing and have a thought, I reckon if you saw the film, and we didn't get to it, but if you saw the film, if you have a thought, feel free. Anything else that I'd like to get in about Doctor? Just words are very important. These white people are not ignorant about racism. Like he wrote, like I said, a 500-page book that has lots of footnotes. At some important points, there are no footnotes, as I've said, but I mean, it has lots of footnotes, lots of information about tons of non-white people and Langston Hughes, and quoting all of these black people from this Paul Robeson from this period. We read his biography too. But white people are not ignorant about racism, white supremacy. They become the experts on these black people, these entire periods of time, these entire groups of black people. And then they can write material, you, your offspring, whomever, they become interested in learning about these folks. And then they get all of this confusion about what racism, white supremacy is, how it works. And you're going and thinking that, oh, I'm learning, I'm getting accurate information that will help me solve this problem. And you're just getting more confounding concepts and people that are not presenting you information accurately. Prejudice, barriers, Jim Crow, color line. We just got all this nonsense as opposed to system of white supremacy, racism, individuals classified as white, practicing racism, mistreating non-white people. Let's see. Is there anyone I was going to get? Passing. Get to the folks who dialed in and see if they have any thoughts to share. That'll give me a moment to. Oh, I guess there's one there. That'll give me a moment. Oh, there is the one right there. Yeah, I'll save it for later. We'll see if folks have any thoughts they have to share. *61. Let's see if the switchboard actually works. Folks have anything they would like to chime in if they got to hear from Dr. Hutchinson, or maybe they missed out totally. Let's see. Retired firefighter in Florida. We see your hand.
Greetings, everyone. As I was listening to this white person in the exchange, I was just thinking on, there are some white people who have come on this program that stated that they did not want to tell non-white people on what to do about racism, or they didn't feel comfortable with it. You know, although a few would say something like, I just forgot her name, the white woman who stating incorrectly, and I think on purpose, about saying this, you're wrong for stating yourself as a quote unquote non-white person when it comes to racism, white supremacy. Jane Elliott, she was bold enough to state that, but there is plenty of opportunity for a white person to be honest and speak directly to the global system of racist white supremacy when they're talking, especially when they're talking directly to non-white people. It is essential that they do so. And time again, you hear these white people, like the one who almost in record time, Gus, left the program. And I think the hint to that was some of these questions, those couple of questions that he was trying to ask you, that you were correcting him. And I could be wrong, but I think that he understood that you had an accurate understanding of what he was attempting to do with these books that he writes on racism. It's designed for profit. He doesn't want to be as accurate as possible, because what it would do, it would turn off the white people that would be interested in buying his books. And white people like to feel good, or like to feel they like to feel like they're not racist, but racism does exist, quote unquote. And those are the type of white people that would buy his books. and there's a market. There's a market for that, especially now, because white people are much more refined than they was when I was born in 1957. They are much more refined now. They don't want to take the position of being a racist, but yet they want to talk about racism, and therefore they would kind of like water down. I have to use a metaphor right now because I can't think of a word. Water down the vocabulary on the subject, as opposed to more accurate terms that they could share. There's one time that I heard just recently of a white person speaking accurately to a non-white person. And I have been listening to Dr. Welsing a lot this week, a lot of her reports and recordings and whatnot, and there's many of them. And she was mentioning how this black male was stating about the religion that's called Christianity, at least his version of it anyway, and how that there's no racism or something like that. And a white female corrected him and said, that what you're studying, we gave that to you for the purpose of confusing you on the subject of racism and white supremacy. This is the type of things that white people should be doing when they're in contact with us. And there's plenty of opportunity because I'm not the smartest person, but at least I'm trying to have an understanding of racist white supremacy. And there's enough of non-white people who do not have a good understanding of racist white supremacy. And in that particular example, a white person certainly can help by stating, such as what Dr. Welsing reported that this white woman stated to this black male about that his version of the version of Christianity that really is actually white supremacy, the religion of white supremacy, actually. And those are some of my thoughts when it came to this person that very quickly got off the line. How dare you? How dare you? And they have egos also. He writes these books, and I didn't have the opportunity to ask my question, to him about, okay, by you writing these books and whatnot, that sort of thing, what is your intent? What is your ultimate objective? Is it to solve the problem of racist white supremacy? Apparently not. Apparently not, by him leaving the program. White people ought to be as patient as patience to the point of hurting patience when it comes to non-white people who want to have an understanding of racist white supremacy. And in that case, he showed that he is actually practicing racism by him leaving the line. And that's what I have to say. Thank you.
Much obliged. Retired firefighter in Florida, old Jane Elliott. I said, told old Gus T, what you doing? Calling yourself a non-white person. She said, you listen to Big Mama on the plantation. I'm telling you, don't you be talking. And then, you gonna keep saying it? I don't have to answer your question. Now, show you that, who was in charge? You sit here and think you gonna just obey me? You gonna sass me? Jane Elliott.
Practicing racism.
Yeah, and she said admitted racist. She said, so that's what I expect. Dr. Hutchinson, Jane Elliott. I tell you what words to use, and you're not supposed to use words to reveal truth. I see caller at 9029, but you're not supposed to use words to reveal truth. It's like he's acting like, I don't know what race means. I just wrote a whole book about racism, white supremacy. I don't know what race means. I just told you I'm a white man.
Right.
I don't know what white means. What is a white man? Can you tell me that? What's a white man?
Right.
Nonsense. And Exactly what he said. White people, racist man, racist woman, racist child, because they're not confused and because they are accustomed to bumping into confused Negroes, it sticks out. Ooh, this Negro is calling attention to words, and he's even saying he's not going to take questions from me. He could have, I mean, we've had people that dipped before early, right? We've been here a long time, 13 years. He didn't even give us, you know what? You're being a coon. Goodbye. Because we've had that one. They, get indignant about it. I've got dinner to go to, and all of it. He didn't even do that. It's like, I'm gone. Like, no word, no syllable, no nothing. Which we've had before, too. But, I mean, no better than tacky. 9029. You should be with us as well.
Greetings, Gus. Greetings, callers and listeners. I was I was just disappointed because I started to get the feeling this guy was kind of pulling that interracial bit. Like, I felt like I remember and I'm just calling the movie out, but I remember the movie Bulworth when the main character said, the best solution for us to do is just so we all have sex together and we all just have interracial babies. Like, he kind of seemed like that type of white person, that type of character. And I've run into that in the office and corporate, where I've had white men say that that's the solution. And I'm like, okay, as opposed to justice, you're saying have sex. Like, it's confusing as hell. And I think he's a very deceptive man that we just had on the line. And I think once he started sensing that there was a little bit of clarity, the slightest bit, he just dipped, because he wasn't going to be caught out there, and probably told his peers to listen in, and he didn't want to get embarrassed because it was going to get embarrassing. But I did want to ask him about the book Slumming. I think I forgot. Let me see if I think I have the book on my shelf over here because I haven't gotten a chance to read it. But he sounds like he's somebody that would probably have some kind of deeper insight into slumming if he was studying the Harlem during that time, because that was happening in Harlem, as from Malcolm X's point of view for some time. So I was kind of curious as to what he thought about that. I think, it's Slumming by Chad Heath. He's talking about the basic sexual and racial encounters in American nightlife, 1885 to 1940. So I was just kind of curious because I'm pretty sure that guy had some kind of understanding of that nightlife and that situation during that time. Also, just a big thing going on is really here. Seems like there's a lot of pushback against, I'd say the mayor here in New York, and that's something just I was thinking about as he was speaking about Harlem and New York City so much. But I'll mute my line. Thank you.
Slumming. Now that is a great point, sir, because he said, that's why I said like that is fact, because he wasn't even here but for like 30 minutes or so. I think the audio segment, it took about 10 minutes to intro, so 20 minutes probably, maybe less than that, probably between 15 and 20. And even that, like, wow, that is fascinating. I'm going to have to go back and re-listen, because he said he was going to write a book on interracial literature. What you said about all the bedroom co-man, why that, I said that. How does everything end up the late Sidney Poitier? How is everything? Guess who's coming? And they make a movie for like every era that's supposed to be. That's all we got to do. Guess who's coming to dinner? And that will solve this problem. He's a Bulworth. And they say, I made a sound clip of it because they say it in Bulworth. I think that's Warren Beatty, the character, but they say it like repeatedly, that
yes,
we just need to have more white people and non-white people they say, the F word, but having sexual intercourse, and that will solve the problem. Now, I mean, normally it's not that flagrant, but I mean, that's that's why Claudia Rankin, she said the same thing. She just said this. This is a black female. She probably doesn't make as much as Jane Elliott to go out and talk about racism, but she's written books, poetry, and will get on major platforms. This problem, white supremacy, racism, will not be solved until white women start having non-white babies. We've already had that. No evidence that solves the problem. But he said that was it. He was going to write a book on that, and Nella Larsen was going to be a large part of that. That's exactly which is interesting, because she married a black male. Now, she did have a white parent and a non-white parent. He said it would include the product of those unions. Now, again, why? That's even a good question. Why is that the focus? Why does that consistently? Why does Gus T have as a rule on Saturdays, no Area 8 and no entertainment? And this, those are closely related too. But why is that the focus? Because I mean, it's not like people haven't talked about that before. J.A. Rogers has books on that. Anybody who
2 volumes.
I think it's 3. I mean, it's not like that subject has not been covered. Pam, the interracial, there are more books. France Fanon, Black Skin, White Matt. There are more books about black people and white people. Rethinking Rufus. Yeah, I mean, you'll pile them up to the ceiling. There'll be more books about that than you could. We're reading one right now. Essie Mae Washington-Williams. We read 2 this year. Lucky. It's more books about that than you could read in a lifetime. Most of them don't even give you. It's the nonsense that we got here, where he's not even using accurate terms. Are you going to add more, sir?
No, I was just saying he's adding part of the noise. Cops. Yeah, I was just saying he's just adding to the confusion. That's all he's doing. He has no interest in solving any problems, because as soon as you spoke about words, he should, as a writer, as an author, he should have automatically understood, even on the basic level. So people that classify themselves as writers that haven't even written a book have a profound understanding of words and when words are used against them or for them. And the fact that he immediately just got triggered by that was, it was a telltale sign. I'll be honest, immediately I was like, I don't think he's going to stay on your show, Gus. Once he started firing back questions, I probably gave him maybe a couple more minutes, but he kind of dipped real quick. He really dipped real quick, I got to tell you that.
This book is over 500 pages. It's not short. It's a lot of detail. So, he is accustomed to comprehensive, and I'm all about that. But one, make sure you answer the question. And then don't just give me buckets of words. Be talking about something, and really talking about something to help us solve problems. I think retired firefighter in Florida, he was talking about Farrah Winfrey. That was the white woman Dr. Welsing was referencing. I know this because she's been a guest on the Cows repeatedly. Also an admitted racist. And she did the same thing in terms of not answering questions. You have to go back and listen to the archives, but she's been here repeatedly. And we talked about that in terms of the religion of white supremacy. She even agreed that, yep, accurate term, that's the best thing to call it, religion of white supremacy. But that is so rare. Admitted white supremacist Farrah Winfrey is not even reliable to do that. To every time that you come around non-white people, you're just offering accurate information. You correct us, or at minimum, I'm not trying to tell you what to do and all that. I'm not being, big mama on the plantation. However, I'm submitting that this is accurate information and you can verify it for yourself. That right there would go a long way. Whenever you talk to non-white people, you're being honest. White people don't do that. And I submit a major component of counter-racism, correct use of words. Individuals who are master deceivers, they flourish when they are deceiving people who are kind of reckless about words. Like, it's real easy to trick children. Oh my God. Like, they don't have an expansive vocabulary. A lot of times they don't ask questions, and you can just kind of get them emotional. Oh, sucker. They're super easy. Unfortunately, it's very easy to trick victims. Number one, hey, Mr. Fuller has it at the front of the book. You don't understand white supremacy racism? Downhill from there. Incorrect use of words, they don't even call it that. We move off into prejudice, white privilege, structures, vestiges of slavery, the institutions of race, or the institution of race, the color line, Jim Crow. What? Are we talking about birds? What? System?
Yes, can I?
System of white supremacy racism. Isn't it? They don't even say system of Jim Crow. At least that would be a little bit better. Like, okay, the system of Jim Crow. We're going to have to get with the system of Jim Crow. Yes, sir.
Yeah, excuse me, Gus. I just wanted to add something. I've been reading a book by Neil Postman called Disappearing Childhood. And basically it's interesting how everything crosses. Basically, one of the things he mentioned, Neil Postman, is that with the invention of all these devices, phones, well, not phones because they weren't around before he passed away, unfortunately, but television, radio, and now it's phones and internet and all these other things. Children have more access to adult content, and images are very different from words. So henceforth, what he's proposing was during the earlier stages, children had words and books to read first before they got to a certain age, and the adults were in charge of that. But now most children don't have to read so much, or not willing to, because of the media that they constantly get bombarded with on their phones or by television. So people, they tend not to have such a high respect for words. And even in this book, he's stating that now that they don't use words that much and don't have a high understanding of words, they're easily abused. And children, even during ancient times, people that were viewed as non-literate were viewed as children during those times. I just think it's interesting you brought that up, because that's pretty much similar to what I'm reading right now.
Boys and gals, that is what they call us. Boys and gals, not men and women. And incidentally, man, the Cows Book Club, a decade, we have read a lot, including Neil Postman, who wrote a lot, but we read Stupid Talk, Crazy Talk, which is, if anything, for today's broadcast, for our guest today and his shenanigans, yes, indeed, we read Neil Postman, Stupid Talk, Crazy Talk, and that book is all about the correct use of words, and even why is it, because I asked him that question, Dr. Hutchinson, before he left, why is it called this? And he left when I was asking, would it be more accurate to title this book Biography of the Color Line or Biography of System of White Supremacy Racism? Now, Neil Postman's book, as I said, Stupid Talk, asked him about the title. We talked about that. He explains it thoroughly in his book. Stupid, when you use words incorrectly, that can promote stupid, crazy thinking. And I just said that. I said that earlier today. When you're trying to solve a problem, you're not able to accurately articulate what that problem is. It becomes much more difficult to solve, if not impossible. You can go crazy, stupid, crazy with incorrect talk, you reduce, you minimize all that. And when you have individuals who are about deception, I like to keep people confused. I like to keep them frustrated. That serves my business interest to have them, what? Huh? I don't know. What? What is it? Huh? Huh? Keep up more of that. Those folks, one of the best things that you can do, using words correctly. Even that, when I say my definition of racism, white supremacy, and we get whiteness, race, racial strains. What? I didn't say any of that. Like you said, these are not my typical boys and gals. Now, these are still niggers. Definitely still a boy, but seems like he understands that to some degree and might be trying to counter that. Out of here. We've seen that a number of times. Could be, Gus is, I was going to say, it could be Gus was uncouth or whatever. No, I wasn't interrupting him. What'd I say? I used my mute button. He was interrupting me and switching those words up. When they do that, I'm talking to a white person and I say white supremacy and they come back with white privilege. Pause. I didn't say that. That might be the way that you talk about that. No, buddy, that is not accurate. And that is so important. White people do that all the. They don't do that when they talk about Nazi Germany. I never hear anyone say Nazi Germany is white privilege. Now, why is that? You go out here and lynch Emmett Till and we can end up talking about white privilege. We talk about Adolf Hitler every time, Holocaust. Why is that? If it's white privilege over here, we can't get anybody indicted for Emmett Till. Why is Adolf Hitler? Why isn't that white privilege? Only when you talk about the mistreatment, particularly of black people, then we minimize, we obfuscate, we find any other words and find ways where we can veer off into blaming black people. We're not even going to talk about white people. He did that too. Structures, institution of race. We're not even talking. When I had to ask, who is it that's doing the classifying here? Oh, individuals classified as white. Got it. And we had that Cow's Archives. White by Law, whole book about that. Ian Hani Lopez, individuals classified as white. That's our job. That's one of the fundamental components of white supremacy racism. Classifying individuals as niggers. This is who we're supposed to mistreat. That's the only reason for having so-called racial classifications. And again, only reason for belonging to a race. Only one. The white race. And I know that's very, very unpopular. A double negative. I got one. So you would not say that is not an unpopular opinion. Double negative. It doesn't even make sense. You would just say that's not popular or that's unpopular. You would pick one. You would not. And when I mean, I pointed that out for years. I'm not even all into grammar like that. Who is he? I'm not an editor. I'm not an English scholar. However, I can recognize double. Like I said, that's like basic elementary school. They tell you don't use double negatives. Generally, you can't even get to middle school without that. I see it all the time. It's in Dr. Ivy League professor. And as I say, it'll be critical moments where they're explaining white supremacy, racism. You don't have to get that technical into it. I'm just saying, Dr. Martin Kevorkian, I said over the years, the white people who are like English professors, they have a doctorate in English, that's what they teach and what have you, very skilled with words. Those end up being very refined racists. Dr. Kevorkian, I'm not going to say that he would qualify as what retired Farr was talking about in terms of a white person who every time, you're around them, they're always giving correct information and blah, blah, blah. However, he is someone, because of his understanding of his proficiency with words and language, he is someone that I can talk to and will from time to time reveal quality information about white supremacy racism. He was a guest on the program this year, and we talked about King Richard way before the Oscars. I was even going to email and be like, man, we spent all that time talking about that film, and then which I should do. I have to report back and see what he says. Anything else folks wanted to get in? I guess star 61. It seems like maybe the switchboard is working today, I guess. We'll see if that continues. Book club Thursday, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. there are so many parallels. Like, my goodness, Essie Mae Washington-Williams, our narrator, who, bless her heart, I'm so thankful I haven't had to read during all this, but she said that the confusion, like, as we're almost at the end, and so just seeing Essie Mae's confusion about her white dad and how she thinks about she doesn't seem like she's keeping white people at arm's length. Certainly not her dad. Her dad, but J. Strom Thurmond, she's not keeping him at arm's length. And what I said, victims of racism don't even have the ability to, quote unquote, keep white people at arm's length. Essie Mae specifically talked about she didn't want to hug her dad. He had ran off and married a 21-year-old white woman when he was 44. Left her mother. In fact, married a 21-year-old white woman when she was 20. Imagine that your parent goes out and marries someone who is literally like a few months older than you. Pretty much at any age. Anywho, she says, I'm done. You're around here, nigga this, nigga that, and the campaign and all the rest of it, and ditch mom just died, you didn't even try and help her and all the rest of it. I'm done. I'm done with you, Strom. I'm going to keep you at arm's length. He doesn't even notify her in advance. He just shows up. Bam, I'm here. Show up at the school. What's going down? Essie Mae, how you doing? I'm not going to do the presentation and all that. But he just shows up at the school. She can't define, or at least that's not the story that we read. I'm keeping you at arm's length. Get on out of here, Strom. Oh, Strom, get on out of. That's not what happens. Okay, she goes and meet with him and all that, but I'm going to keep him at arm's length then. And he comes up at the end. Give me a hug. She says she didn't have a chance to, hey, I'm keeping you at arm's length. Back up, Strom. Nope. That's what I expect. System of white supremacy with confusion. We don't even have the power to get white people up off of us in most instances. Pam talked about that in the interracial con game. A lot of times, all of this incorrect sexual activity happens because we aren't even able to just say no to a white person. Even today, 2022, talk about that in Neutralizing Workplace Racism. You might have to practice it so you can say it, be natural, roll off if someone is doing all that touching and everything else. Power data, again, this isn't about separation, barriers, color line. This is about a power dynamic. I mean, really, if you want to make it as super simple and accurate, this is about mistreatment, period. All that other stuff is just nonsense. That lying and confusion, which is more mistreatment right there. When you're keeping somebody confused to their detriment, all of that is violence. That is super mistreatment and harm. So that's all it is. Individuals classified as white, we're dedicated to mistreatment. It's going to be mistreatment for individuals that we say are not white, and we'll do the classifying on that. But this is just about mistreatment. We're just putting it on a global scale, known universe scale, system of mistreatment that is white supremacy racism. Anything else folks need to get in? Grant. We will see. Chad Heap wrote that book, Slumming. Looks like he's classified as white, so maybe we'll see if we can get him as a guest on the program. University of Chicago Press. How interesting. Everything keeps going back to Chicago. Much obliged for folks participating. Again, hope, I don't know. People might allow me to use Twitter again. Maybe they won't. I'm not going to get another account and all that craziness. I'm not even that big a fan of social media, and I was not misbehaving on Twitter if I had been on name calling folks, anybody really, white people or non-white people, or cutting a fool. I would be otherwise, but that was not the case. As I said, my last posts were about an albino squirrel and a white man stealing milk crates. Subversive. They did have the military intelligence division. That said, we'll be here Thursday, book club, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Man, it is so similar. It is amazing. Essie Mae Washington-Williams, dear Senator, we're getting close to the end. We will not conclude this week, but we are getting close to the end of the text. I've been told the confusion, because she was upset, like it was kind of an emotional, I guess if anything, you are supposed to have an emotional connection to your parents. Father, mother, that's biology beyond even being a human being, baby pups and piglets, calves. They have attachments to their parents. That is the way this works. That said, Essie Mae Washington-Williams, last week, she was emotionally, like I said, her mom had just died and her dad was flagrantly practicing racism, and he did the same thing. He did exactly what Dr. Hutchinson did. She's saying, man, you've been out campaigning and talking about separation. It's exactly what we read last week. She said, you've been out talking all this nonsense, and he said, oh, you don't want to go swimming with white people, do you? That's crazy. That's what you want to do, is go to the Woolworth and get a hot dog. That's silliness. It's exactly Dr. Hutchinson. It's the exact same thing. Anyway, she was upset. He did hit her off with, like, as I said last week, probably $1,000, probably way more than that. Could have been like $5,000. Who knows? But he did her off with a lot of money, which can be a tremendous salve right to this day, 2022 for sure. But I mean, that's her dad, gave her half of her genetic material. So all of that to say, it is human nature to have emotional feelings either way. Happy about someone, upset about someone, indifferent about someone. Those emotions can change. Counter-racism is about logic. It is not, I hate Dr. Hutchinson. I'm a Marxist. Yeah. It's just the logic. I mean, I can't exactly say that I'm happy about a racist. That would not be true at all. However, it's just about following logic. This is what I expect. This is how racists are supposed to function. They lie. They are violent. Lying is a form of violence. When they can't do that sometimes, I'm going to dip out totally. I can't confound you with words. Go back and tell other people to see if we can harm you another kind of way. But that's what I expect.
Gus?
Yes, sir.
Pardon the interruption again, sir, but there's just one of the things I wanted to mention. This is really something I think that's good to watch. There was a documentary on Muhammad Ali that was done from PBS, I believe, and that was a very good documentary in regards to boxing and such forth, and especially from a racial aspect. And on Showtime, they have another version of the continuation of what from Muhammad Ali and on, and how the transition was very interesting, how Muhammad Ali was very political, very involved in many aspects, and then transforming after he left, fighters such as Marvelous Marvin Hagler, Sugar Ray Leonard, such forth took, the Hitman Tommy Hearns, and they speak about, the whole entire series is just about, it's about racism. They talk about from Nicaragua, the war that the so-called America has with them, just all out throughout the whole entire thing, how boxing and the whole craft itself is not only violent, but also so racial, and how almost every fight was almost about a race situation, including Marvelous Marvin Hagler when he went to London and was booed and bottles were thrown on him after he beat one of the boxers that called him a nigger before the fight. But it's just definitely something worth watching from a historic standpoint, especially for people who don't, want to read certain things or read that kind of content. I'll mute my line.
Much obliged, sir. The late Marvin Hagler discussed that fight with the race soldier across the pond last year with Dr. Gerald Horne, his book, The Bitter Sweet Science. That's the entire thesis of his book, White Supremacy, Racism, Gangsterism, which is really one and the same, and the industry of boxing, Bob Arum and all the rest of Muhammad Ali and all the Marvin Haglers in there, Floyd Mayweather, about this time last year, in fact, 12 months ago. Dr. Horne was just with us, in fact, a couple days ago. don't think it was this month. Maybe it was the very end. I think it was I think it was literally the last day of March. So it feels like it could have been this month only because it was the very, very, very end of March. But he was just with us again. Race War, one of the best books I've ever read. Super well researched. And again, same thing he just said, entire world. All of this about white supremacy, racism. I think even in that one, I think Jack Johnson and Joe Lewis both are mentioned even in that one. How about that? Much obliged, folks participating. Hopefully the switchboard, I think, may have been working today. Maybe it'll maintain. Who knows? Have to see how it goes. We should be here Thursday, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific, continuing with Dear Senator, almost at the end. All of that said, words super important. Be mindful. Sobriety would be best under conditions of white supremacy. There are like lots of parties. Like this is a good chunk of the book, and Nella Larson's like fame and heydays, like 1920s, 1930s. Some of that is during, I guess, what they call the Prohibition era. But lots of parties. I think I was reminded, I think one of the earlier visits Mr. Fuller had on the cows, he talked about the importance of being focused, what it is that you're supposed to be trying to get done, and to not lose track of that. One is to make sure words are not being used that are going to help push you away from, what was it that we're supposed to be doing? Oh, yes, that. Make sure that gets done. But he said that during the 1960s, I guess, people going to New Orleans, no less. Now that right there, like New Orleans. Why is this in New Orleans? He said they went down to New Orleans or wherever, and people are partying, champagne, got their nightgowns on, trying to hook up for sexual activity. There we go again, Area 8. And he said, hey, I get it. That's fun, champagne, all that. The sexual activity is fun, right on. However, none of that is why we said we are coming to Louisiana. We said we're coming here for counter-racist purposes. Whew. That distraction is in the book over and over, where it's like, man, we're in the middle of all this like intense white supremacy, racism, the depression. Black people are being lynched every other day. And I mean, like, not police, whatever. I mean, like, hey, I think he looked at me funny, or he might have raped a white woman, or reckless eyeballed a white woman, or he took a stamp, or he stole an orange, or whatever. He didn't get off the sidewalk fast enough. So we got to lynch 5 niggers, maybe 12. That's what it is happening regular basis. Maybe we punish someone, probably don't. That's happening on a regular basis, and we're slumming. We're hanging out with white people in Coontown. Let's get our drink on and do the Charleston, the funky chicken, listen to some songs, sounds. Come on. Like, man, priorities. What do we do? Mr. Fuller said that, like, if we're going to get together, especially if white people are like, this is business. Turn off those strobe lights, put that liquor away, cork that champagne, the wine, all of that. We really didn't even come to eat. You can put the silverware up. Oh, you got the fancy china. Well, that's great. You can put all that away. We did not come to eat. If somebody's hungry, you can pack up, sandwiches or whatever. They take that when we leave. But we got like serious business to tend to right now. That's the way it should be. Not horse. It's over and over. We're hanging out, party. Even if it was all black people, like, man, all this hanging out and partying and kicking it and having. We ate and drank and stayed up till 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. Like, we do not need to party to replace white supremacy with justice. That's been a big part of the problem, particularly when you got white cultural vampires looking to come and do all kinds of slumming and sexual debauchery. Dr. Wells talked about that all the time. Hey, let's calm all of that reckless sexual activity down, all those throwaway children, shut all that down, and let's get serious about solving this problem. Putting Dr. Hutchinson out of business. If you are out and about, this is not the time to be in confrontation with total strangers. If you see someone being hostile and rowdy, exit. You can call enforcement officers and all that as you are vacating the premises. You should be thinking that this person may be armed. They may have an entire armed entourage. If you didn't leave your residence, prepare to die and or kill, exit. If you're in a vehicle, you're sober, buckled, not on your mobile phone. We need all of our attention, minimize contact with race soldiers as best we can, and just trying to stay safe under very terroristic conditions. Jim Crow. That said, Creator, we ask that you help us remain patient with other black people, victims of white supremacy. We ask that you help us remain patient with ourselves. Remind us to demonstrate the highest levels of black self-respect at all times, in all places, each and every time we are in contact with another black person. It has been time. Replace white supremacy with justice immediately. Words are super important. All of us, victims of white supremacy, let's work to improve, get better in how we articulate racism, white supremacy, and striving for accuracy. Super important. Sobriety would be pressed, no name calling, no gossiping, and no reckless sexual activity. Dr. Welsing, those throwaway children, that is a crucial component to maintaining white supremacy racism. Take those throwaway children out of racists' hands. Cal signing out. Thanks all for tuning in.